Welcome to the Crazy Might Work podcast, where we celebrate authors, entrepreneurs, innovators, inventors, and scientists who live at the very frontiers of human consciousness and possibility. We discuss their moments of breakthrough and analyze the strategies they use to enhance their own thinking and challenge conventional wisdom. Good morning, everyone. Our guest today grew up in Wollongong and studied at the University of New South Wales, completing a PhD in chemical engineering before going on to postgraduate studies in Italy. In the meantime, she's completed a 12-month spell in isolation in Antarctica and been chosen as a member of the European Space Agency astronaut class of 2022. She's here to tell us about her seemingly unlikely journey to this point through a super competitive selection process that saw her ultimately selected out of 22,500 candidates. She's also going to share some of her experiences and learnings from her time in Antarctica and how these might apply more broadly to people like you and me. She may yet become the first female Australian astronaut by participating in an International Space Station, Moon, or Mars adventure. Please join me in welcoming her all the way from Bologna, Meganne Christian. Welcome, Meganne.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Great for you to get up early and join us on the podcast. So very grateful to have you. So how does a young woman from Wollongong studying an industrial chemistry degree at UNSW go on to be selected as an astronaut with the European Space Agency?
Yeah, I guess when you say it like that, it does sound kind of unlikely, doesn't it? I mean, one trump factor is that I was born in the UK, so I do have European citizenship. Well, a citizenship of one of the member states of the European Space Agency. So that is what allowed me to apply. But as for the rest, well, it's been quite a long journey, I guess. I kind of always was fascinated by space as a young kid, but at that time there was certainly no Australian Space Agency, and even now there's no technically no human spaceflight program that the Australian Space Agency has. So it was, even though I loved space and I thought that being an astronaut was the coolest job in the world, I didn't think that it was something that I was going to be able to do. So it was kind of in the back of my mind. And that has kind of continued for most of my life. So as you said, I did my Bachelor of Engineering and then a PhD at UNSW. And then afterwards, I moved to Italy for a postdoc. And I've been just doing research since then, but I've had a few interesting adventures. So like you said, I've been to Antarctica a couple of times actually, and I've done some parabolic flights. So I've experienced weightlessness in zero gravity conditions for testing some of my materials. And so I guess it was kind of those experiences that in the end led me to apply to become an astronaut.
It's I think you've already identified a couple of the highlights there, but we do want to get into them in a bit more detail. But perhaps just before we do that, when you reflect on the whole journey, and you think about who you were perhaps at the start of the journey versus who you are now, what for you has changed? Think about your personality or the way that you look at life.
Yeah, interesting question. I think I've always been an adventurous and curious sort of person. So, and I think they are the traits that kind of led me to where I am. But there are various experiences that I have had that have given me more confidence. For example, before going to Antarctica, I never thought that I could actually have the skills or learn the things that would be necessary to be an astronaut. So I think slowly over time, and particularly with that experience, my confidence has been built enough to think, okay, yeah, this is something that I really can do.
And Meganne, you mentioned, of course, that you needed European citizenship to start the process. But of course, that's not what gets you through a process that involves 22,500 applicants. So do you think there's anything in particular? I mean, obviously the confidence has played a role, and I guess that's accumulated over the the entire period. But you mentioned also curiosity. Is that the secret ingredient, or is there something else that you think in particular has helped you perhaps through some of the the more testing moments?
Yeah, I think you have to be a very well-rounded person. So that confidence has to be matched with humility, and the adventurousness with good, strong risk management. So I think being able to be a well-rounded person with a lot of different interests at the same time as being able to learn and pick things up quickly. I think it's really a lot of factors that combine to make that person. And it's not just one kind of person that's perfect to be an astronaut. I don't think there is a person that is perfect. And they're looking for all kinds of different backgrounds as well. So there are also different kinds of people that build the astronaut team. So I don't think I can pick out one particular secret. But certainly being a well-rounded kind of person is something that helps.
I was reading up on some of your personal interests, and they seem to range from rock climbing to water rafting to knitting and playing music. So there's a very wide range of interests there. Do you think that helps?
Yeah, I think it does. So yeah, there's this kind of background of astronauts being these people who do extreme sports. They're skydivers and pilots, test pilots. So there's that side of being adventurous sort of people, scuba diving as well. But at the same time, like I said, it goes back to being a well-rounded, balanced sort of person, because you have to you can't just be somebody who's always looking for a thrill. That's not what it's about. It's also about managing that risk and, knowing what you're in for. And for example, the space agencies don't tend to recruit people who would do a one-way trip to Mars. They're looking for people who want to go there and come back. So I think, balancing that again with some other kind of activities. I mean, I love, this thing called via ferrata, which is a kind of mountain climbing, rock climbing activity. But I also love being at home, relaxing, knitting, or crocheting in front of a Netflix movie. So I think you need to be able to access different emotions and different areas of your life through doing different activities.
And you mentioned that that whole ability to manage risk. Not go on one-way trips to the moon or Mars if you can avoid them. But just thinking about that risk management, and I know many things that can happen to you in space which probably don't even cross most people's register. But how do you process that? I mean, would you still leap at an opportunity to say go to Mars, or be one of the first to do that? And how do you process that risk when you think about it?
Yeah, it's not easy, because there's this really strong desire to do something, to go into space and explore. At the same time, that it's really dangerous. Not just because a rocket might explode, but also because of what you're exposed to, even on the ISS. The moon in particular, exposed to radiation, long duration space flight has a lot of difficulties, bone density loss, muscle loss. There's very increased likelihoods of various kinds of diseases. So yeah, certainly there are a lot of things that can happen, and you have to understand that, before you go ahead and do it. But I think that, that sense of exploration and the desire to learn more about the universe, and again, that sense of adventure is what you kind of balance up with that, and you make your own decision. And my reflection is that I would do it anyway.
Speaking of various kinds of exposures, you spent 12 months at the Concordia station in Antarctica in 2019. And I don't know if this was your first trip, Meganne, but this was at least partly conducting atmospheric physics and meteorology research, part of a team of 13 who were completely isolated within 1,000 miles of the geographical South Pole. And regularly enduring temperatures of minus 65 degrees Celsius. I can't even imagine what that's like. And then extremes of minus 80. Just tell us a bit about that experience. Seems like a long time to be living in a fridge. What did that do for you? What did you take away from that? You said you've been back as well, so obviously it wasn't bad enough to keep you away.
Yeah.
But just tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I did. I absolutely loved it. So that was my first trip, and then I went back again for just a summer season, a couple of months, in the middle of COVID, actually. But yeah, that first experience, it was so unique. It's special because really not that many people get to experience these extreme conditions. And those temperatures that you were talking about, yeah, it's absolutely true. And when you add on the wind chill, we actually got down to a minimum temperature of minus 104 degrees Celsius. And I was out in that every day because all my experiments were outside, so I had to go and had to go and work outside. And I guess it's not the temperature that's the hardest thing. The temperature you can deal with, you're prepared for it, you have a lot of clothes that are designed for it. Maybe not for minus 100 degrees, but for that minus 60 sort of temperature, you're quite well prepared for it with lots and lots of layers. But then it's the fact of being isolated for all that time with such a small amount of people. The base is reasonably large, so you do have space for yourself when you need it. But those are the people that you're with for a whole year. And for 9 months of that time, no airplanes can come in and out. So if something happens, you really have to depend upon each other to get through it. And so having strong relationships and not letting those relationships deteriorate is hugely important. Depending upon the others, and you need to depend upon them, and also on your family and friends back home. Fortunately, that we have not a great internet connection, but we did have WhatsApp messages to get through. Because what you feel over that time is so strongly amplified. I don't know what the psychology behind this is, but I don't know, maybe it's something about the 100 days of darkness, or the fact that you're not seeing anything different from day to day. But those emotions are really amplified. So if you feel a bit lonely or sad, you feel that really, really strongly. Or if you feel happy, on the other hand, you feel that really strongly too. So it's a really different kind of experience, and you do push your limits. You do come to understand what you are able to do and what makes you frustrated or what makes you excited. And so I guess that's what I came out of it with, just with a better understanding of my limits, or perhaps realizing that I didn't have the limits that I thought I did. And that's where it comes back to that confidence building I was talking about before, because when I went there, it was to do a kind of subject that I had never studied before. I had never done anything to do with atmospheric physics and meteorology before. And so before I went, I was actually quite worried about being able to run these experiments because I had no background in it. I had very little computer programming, which was a lot of the work that I did there. A very little experience with electronics, which again was a lot of what I did there, but I learned it all very quickly on the job. And that's what made me realize that, yeah, I can learn these things. And, so after that, that's when it kind of went, okay, yeah, I can become an astronaut too.
I've got no doubt that being able to learn fast is going to be a huge part of being on another planet. just thinking about the emotional side of that you spoke about, what preparation or training did you have prior to going? Was there any support? Because it sounds like some of that was a bit of a surprise, or a bit of a learning. But what can you do to prepare for that type of environment?
So we had a couple of training courses. Everybody who goes to Antarctica, at least from the Italian side, goes through a 1-week training course on just kind of the fundamentals of Antarctica, a lot of theory, but also practice in firefighting and using being able to fall out of boats, because Italy also has a coastal station. So there's kind of a mix of theory and practice. And then there's another week of practice where you go and spend a week out on a glacier, camping out on a glacier on Mont Blanc. And so that part kind of gives you a little taste of the exposure that you'll feel, and certainly builds your teamwork throughout all that time. Well, throughout the first week, most of all, the Italian side of the team, excuse me, the Italian side of the team was having debriefings and just talking to a psychologist for the whole time, talking about what we felt we wanted to get out of the experience, what things we might things that we might think we'd be annoyed about other people, just to put them on the table beforehand. And then Concordia is both an Italian and French base. So we had another training course a few weeks later with the French team as well. And that was when we really got together with just the 13 of us and did some team building activities, and again, went through all those things that we thought might come up. Of course, when you're actually in there, everything else, it's not what you think is going to happen. It's always going to be something else, but at least you talk about what things that might come up, and you have a psychologist there to help you through it. And then when we were into Antarctica, we didn't have a psychologist on the team, but we always had access to a psychologist back in Italy or France.
Mm. And were there any of those activities that you've carried forward with you that you think are still, valuable in other, say, team environments, maybe that you've used outside of Antarctica? Is there anything that's traveled with you?
I think definitely identifying quickly strengths and weaknesses, both in yourself and in other members of the team, not obviously pointing out weaknesses, but getting everybody to sort of talk about what they think they can contribute and what they think they might be weaker in. That helps kind of head towards your goals in the end. So yeah, definitely that part of it is helpful in every kind of team.
And was there a strong sense of shared objectives or shared interests in the group, or was everyone there on a slightly different agenda or research objective?
There was a bit of a mix, and in part that's because they're all different roles. So there are researchers and we all have our own individual projects. There's a doctor, there's a chef, most important member of the team, and then there are various logistical crew members an electrician, mechanic, and plumber. And then the head of the technical team who also looks after the motors. So we all have quite different tasks to do. But it really is important to share the kind of excitement of being there and to share the overall experience. So we had a lot of parties, a little get-togethers when it was people's birthdays or special events. And we tried to make sure that we always ate at least lunch and dinner together. It wasn't always possible, but generally we would always try to get together at that time to really keep up the morale. And
Meganne, you mentioned that that there are other kind of equivalents outside of Antarctica, but certainly Antarctica is one of those analogs that's also used by NASA, and I think some of the other space agencies also, to do research and training in ice, being isolation, confinement, and extreme conditions. Were you aware of any of that research? Were you part of it or able to learn from it at all?
Yes, absolutely. So Concordia is also known as White Mars because it's the closest thing, more or less, that we have on Earth to that kind of long duration mission to Mars. Not just because of the isolation and the cold, the extreme environment, but also the fact that it's at altitude. So it's at more than 3,200 meters, but the air at the poles is thinner. So it's like being at 4,000 meters at our latitudes. So there's also low oxygen levels, which also adds to all those things. And for that reason, every year the European Space Agency sends a research doctor on the winter of a crew. So even before we went to Antarctica, we started having tests done on us. And then when we were there, we regularly had all sorts of biological samples taken, lots of psychological questionnaires. We were taking probiotics to see what effect they might have, just to get an idea of what it might be like on a long duration space mission. One of the particularly fun tasks that I enjoyed was a project called SimSkill. One part of it was every month doing various sort of mental exercises and also a few physical exercises to see how you go over time, whether you get better or worse. It's more likely to get worse with the long period of isolation. But the main part of it was that during the initial period, they teach you to dock the Soyuz capsule on the ISS in a simulator. They actually took a simulator down to Concordia Station. And then they measure your progress. So they teach you how to do it in the summer, and then you're divided into a group where 1 month or every 1 month or every 3 months, you then have to do a test to see if you're still able to dock the Soyuz module on the ISS during that time. And so that was actually quite exciting. And as a woman, there are only 3 of us, which is actually quite a high proportion for Concordia, but there were only 3 out of the team of 13. And so not as many of the tests were done on us, because of a question of anonymity. But yes, I still got to participate in some of that research.
And were you the docking champion out of that?
I was one of them, yes.
I thought there might be a reason why you mentioned it.
No, not so. Actually, the people who play video games are the best at it. They're yeah. And I have to say that when I went to the Kennedy Space Center when I was quite young, I was about 14 or something like that. I had a go at landing the space shuttle in their simulator, and I was absolutely terrible at it. So I wouldn't take that as any precedent.
It's definitely not as easy as it looks, that's for sure.
Yeah, not at all.
So you mentioned you've been back since then, since that first experience. Did anything change for you? Were those experiences different in some noticeable way?
Yeah, they were quite different, actually. So when I went back again, it was in the middle of COVID, because they were looking for people. Usually during the summer, if you go just for the summer, you go there just to look after one project, which is the project that you're involved in also throughout the year. Usually, you might be the PI or in the team. And so you go there to maybe set up a new experiment or to replace parts or, things like that. But that year there was a really restricted crew. We only had about 40 people that actually went to Antarctica for the summer season that year. And usually you'd have over 100. And so they were looking for people who knew how to look after more than one project. And the ideal thing is to get a winter over person to do that. So, they asked me if I wanted to go back, and I definitely wanted to go back. And that experience was quite different because I guess I felt like I had more responsibilities. I was taking care of an extra project that I hadn't looked after before because the person who was supposed to got COVID just as they were about to leave. And so, I definitely felt like I had a lot more responsibility, and the things that you're doing during that time are a big deal because they're going to affect the rest of the year. Also, because it's a summer season, it's a lot shorter, so you kind of go into it with a different attitude. So yeah, it was a bit different, and I don't know whether I would say that I enjoyed it more or less, but yeah, both experiences were amazing, and definitely both very, very worthwhile.
You mentioned, Meganne, how the research you were doing was a bit out of your wheelhouse. I understand that for the most part, your focus has been on hydrogen storage. So I'm just interested in why that, that's obviously become quite a long-standing area of focus for you. And I think it's partly what you're doing now, right, in your current role?
Sort of. So
Okay.
Hydrogen storage is what I did for my PhD. And this is basically the problem is that if you want to have a hydrogen fuel cell car, for example, you need some way of storing that hydrogen. If it was just hydrogen gas, you would have this kind of 3-meter diameter balloon over the top of your car, and that's obviously not practical. If you want to store it as a compressed gas, then you have to go to really high pressures, and there are kind of dangers around that, and the fact that hydrogen escapes very easily from containers. You can liquefy it, but you need a really low temperature. So basically, it's looking at ways of keeping the hydrogen in a safe, compact, and light way. And so that's what I did my PhD on. And as you say, it's definitely a growing industry because hydrogen is becoming more important as we move into alternative energies. After that, I actually moved kind of out of it. Still in nanomaterials because my thesis was on storing hydrogen in nanomaterials. I moved into a European project called the Graphene Flagship, working on a material called graphene, which has a lot of really interesting properties. It's superlative properties, let's say. It's an amazing conductor of both heat and electricity. It's very mechanically robust, and it's used for all sorts of things. Mainly the idea is for electronics, but yes, what I've been kind of applying it to is not so much hydrogen storage, but alternative energies and storage like in batteries and supercapacitors. And more recently, I've been using it in catalysis for the production of hydrogen. So kind of going back from where I was starting in storing hydrogen, and now I've been through a whole lot of different things, some space applications as well. And my research now is kind of going back to focus on hydrogen again, but this time from the production angle.
And do you think it will have a strong application in the space program? Do you see it being a source of fuel in that context?
Well, hydrogen is already used as a fuel for most rockets. So what they do is they have a hydrogen and an oxygen booster, and these combine. And the problem there is, where do you get your hydrogen from? So most hydrogen these days is produced from methane. Combustion, usually. That's the easiest way of doing it. And for that, you're releasing carbon. And so you are polluting. And that is not what we call green hydrogen, which is made from renewable resources. And so definitely getting hydrogen, producing hydrogen in a cleaner way is going to be extremely important.
So, Meganne, just coming back to this phenomenal selection process that you've been through, which lasted longer than 18 months, I think, probably considerably longer in the final wash up. But the thing is that it's still not over. So you're kind of not yet, fully dedicated to a space mission on the program per se. How do you process that? Because that must create a lot of uncertainty, and it must be difficult to sort of be sitting on the sidelines, not completely, but in some sense of the word, without an end date or a date by which you know categorically whether you're on or off a mission.
Yeah, it is really hard. Starting during the selection process, just these long periods of waiting. There's certainly kind of stress and anxiety that builds up during that time, not knowing what's coming next. And when it got to the end of the selection process, I did think that was it. But then, like you say, that's not really the end. For those of us that are members of the reserve, we don't get to start our training until when and if we are assigned a mission in the future. So it is really tough. It's been tough these last couple of weeks. The career astronauts have gotten to start their training, which is amazing. And but there's envy there. I would like to be there, training with them. So yeah, you have to learn a lot of patience, equanimity. You really, yeah, it's tough, but it's also exciting because I have to look back and say, okay, I was selected from those 22,500 people, and there are a lot of opportunities coming up with the growth of the space industry. So I have a lot more chance than I did before of going to space. And I have to kind of focus on that aspect and not worry too much about when it's going to happen, and just hope that it will happen sometime.
And when you think about those new opportunities opening up, some of the commercial space travel opportunities, and do you feel those are now kind of readily available to women, or do you think there's still a bit of a skew towards male astronauts in that program? Do you see that shifting at all?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't noticed any particular kind of skew, but it's hard to know exactly how to become a private astronaut. I mean, apart from paying a lot of money. So I know that on Axiom 2, Peggy Whitson is going to be the commander, and she was a NASA astronaut, very, very high achieving NASA astronaut. But yeah, without knowing how you actually get onto one of those missions, apart from paying for it, I wouldn't know whether there is a skew or not. I think I've been seeing a reasonable balance. But again, hard to say at this early stage.
When you think back to these adventures that you've had as part of Antarctica and throughout the selection process, if you were to play that back as a highlights reel of a movie, mm-hmm. What would be the moments that would really stand out for you as being most memorable, for good or bad reasons, but just the things that stick in your memory most of all?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many things for Antarctica, but I guess one of the things would be when I would go out every week to clean the instruments on what's called the American Tower, which is a 45-meter high tower, which was a pretty tough job considering the altitude and the distance, and it's a kilometer from the base and that kind of thing. But I would go there with one of my crewmates, and we would take off our head torches and just stand there in the stars. And I just remember these moments where you'd feel like you were in them. I mean, the Milky Way was making my shadow on the snow. So it's just incredible. So many shooting stars. And, so I guess, looking back and thinking about moments like that from Antarctica, and then, other things that led up to it, like, doing a couple of parabolic flights. The first one I definitely remember more fondly than the second one. The second one, unfortunately, I got very sick. I did talk about it with the doctor on board, and he said that it's a different mechanism to how you get sick in space, so he wasn't worried about it for the application to become an astronaut. But yeah, thinking about experiencing a weightlessness for the first time, that's definitely a highlight. And then going through the selection process, well, I was actually one of the last one called for almost every round of selections. And so, definitely the extremely long wait before I heard about the first round, was a really stressful time. But of course, hugely exciting when I finally heard the news. Same goes for the next round as well. And then, because I was in one of the last groups to do the psychological testing, that meant that I was still in Cologne, and they called me up the next morning and said, okay, you can stay here for another week and do the medical testing. So that was an interesting experience. They had told us that we could pack our bags for an extra week just in case we would be staying on another week, whereas everybody else had a lot of time between one trip and another. And then panel interview was probably the hardest part of the process for me. They had some really, really tough questions, and they really pushed you. And then the final interview was kind of a relief because it was actually really lovely, just getting to know the Director General, and then of course my final highlight was being called while I was riding my bicycle home from work. I felt my wrist vibrating with the phone call, and I wasn't going to answer because I was on my bike, but I had a quick look and saw that it was a number from France. And so I'm like, okay, I have to answer this call. And so I stopped, and that was the Director General inviting me to Paris for the announcement.
Fantastic. If you reflect on that same process, are there any sort of life-changing moments that you think where maybe you might have opted out under different circumstances, or if you were a different person at that point? Are there any kind of things that you think have fundamentally changed the outcome for you on the way through, in terms of your own realizations or epiphanies along the way?
I don't think there have been any moments. I think there was the epiphany of my time in Antarctica and realizing that I could do it. That was probably the biggest thing that changed along kind of this full life journey. And it was also around that time that I heard that ESA was going to be calling for new astronauts for the first time in 12 years in the next couple of years. So I think that was definitely the life-changing moment. I came back from Antarctica saying that I was going to apply to become an astronaut. But during the selections process, not really. Another highlight that I had was that I got together with a little study group of other people from around the world, around Europe, that were applying to become an astronaut as well. We actually had a Discord server for astronaut candidates that was open to anybody. And from that Discord server, we kind of discussed what we were doing to study for it. And a couple of people from there actually, brought together this little team, this little study group. And so that really helped, having the support of them during that time. Unfortunately, they didn't get through the first round of screening, but they still supported me the entire way through. And we met up with each other in Barcelona one time. And so I think that was another thing that changed me, because we would do this training together, and that was also confidence building, I guess, and also put things in perspective, because those tests for the first round were really, really hard. So doing that training together was I guess that kind of changed my perspective too.
I think it always helps to know you're not the only one going through something, and having that ability to share the experience with others, I think always makes
absolutely.
it much easier. Just in closing, a couple of questions then, Meganne, just to ask you, who's the one person that you think has most influenced your personal development, and how?
Yeah, I don't think I have just one person. And I always think that it's the people that are around me that I'm close to, more than some public figure people that I don't actually know. So I have huge respect for both of my parents. My mum's not around anymore, unfortunately, but she raised 5 daughters, and we're all extremely different, with different interests and different kind of attitudes. And she just did an amazing job of helping us, each of us, kind of become who we are in a different way. And my dad, he's also an industrial chemist. So I guess I kind of followed his footsteps academically. And then my 3 elder sisters are all quite a lot older than me. They're half sisters. And I definitely looked up to them as I was growing up and was extremely close to my younger sister. So I would say it's my whole family that's had a huge impact on me, and perhaps some of my teachers from school, for some of my extracurricular activities, and for maths in particular, because that was my favorite subject. So yeah, it's really people that I've really known and gotten to know that have influenced me the most.
Thanks, Meganne. And just in concluding, many of our listeners are people that are at the forefront or frontier of something, whether that's in science or creative pursuits or somewhere else. And I just wonder what one bit of advice you'd give to someone who's trying something that's quite difficult, that's a bit out there, perhaps not fully understood, and difficult to do.
Yeah, I would say look out for opportunities that might not necessarily be on that traditional path of what you're doing. And if that opportunity comes along, take it. You really don't want to miss out on it, because it's something that's going to change your life probably, and will probably help you in your goals, because it's going to give you a different perspective. So that's what I'd say. Look out for new opportunities and take them when they come.
Thanks, Meganne, and thank you so much for making the time to do this with us today, and really appreciate what you've shared with us. And we hope to be hearing soon that you're on a mission to space, Moon, Mars, whatever. We wish you all the best with that. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you to you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Meganne. Bye for now.
Bye.